If a husband comes every time you ring a brass bell, who taught whom to behave that way? My name is Tamsin Rowe. I am 41, and I run guest operations for 3 hotels where delay is another word for failure. I never forced Jonah to serve anyone. He built a marriage around being useful and then acted wounded when people used him. At our 10th anniversary, I put his father's old counterbell beside my plate because the staff were busy and my husband knew the house better than they did. Elspeth wiped champagne from her heel on the bottom of his black apron, and yes, I laughed with the table. Jonah only asked whether I needed anything else, which was his usual way of accepting that I was right. I planned to ring once more before dessert and settle who still answered to whom. Jonah's father kept it on the scarred front desk of Price & Son Restorations. When a customer entered, the door pushed a metal arm and the bell gave one dull note. After his father died, Jonah cleaned it with lemon oil and brought it home wrapped in an old shop cloth. He placed it in my hands because I had once loved that sound. During our first year together, I used to visit the workshop after late shifts, sit on an upside-down crate, and wait for him to finish. He would ring the bell when the kettle boiled. I would pretend he was summoning me, and he would slide a chipped blue mug across the bench. That was us before usefulness became the only thing he offered. My mother, Maureen, cleaned rooms at the first Belgrave Hotel for 11 years. On school holidays, I waited in the linen room, breathing bleach while she folded sheets. 2 girls from my class once saw us leave through the service entrance. For the rest of that term, they clicked their fingers at me and asked for towels. I learned who used the front door and who was told to stay out of sight. Of course I chose the front. By 35, I controlled staff rotas and every opening checklist at Belgrave House hotels. Jonah showed pride by fixing my office hinge and collecting dry cleaning after late meetings. If I asked whether he was angry, he found a shelf that needed leveling. Someone had to keep our home moving, he would say. Fine, I let him. The first thing that disappeared was an olive canvas carryall from his workshop. I had sent him to collect leather samples for a lobby refurbishment, pick up Elspeth's coat, and return a borrowed lamp before 6. 3 stops. 40 minutes if traffic behaved. He stood by the door with the carryall over one shoulder and asked whether I needed anything else. I told him to bring sparkling water because Camilla was coming to review the plans. He came home with the water and every item on my list. The canvas bag did not come back. When I asked about it, he said it was somewhere safe. I assumed he meant the workshop. Jonah gave objects more care than conversations, and of course that was easier than telling his wife what was wrong. The next morning I rang the brass bell from the dining table because he was upstairs and my coffee had gone cold. He came down, warmed it, and asked whether there was anything else. There was always something else. Camilla Serrano came into my life through work. She was 39, single, and beautiful without looking arranged. She designed old buildings without sanding away their age, which clients found noble and I found expensive. Belgrave hired her to redesign the West Wing. I became her main contact because someone had to stop architects from treating budgets like rumors. Soon we were eating late dinners and laughing about men who confused silence with depth. Jonah met her when a sample cabinet arrived with a split door. He repaired it in our dining room while Camilla reviewed drawings. She watched his hands with attention, not hunger. I did not care about the difference. She asked what he charged for restoration work. I answered before he did and said husbands did not invoice their wives for tightening screws. Jonah looked up from the hinge. Camilla looked at me. The room lost its easy sound. I told her Jonah enjoyed being useful. He asked whether that was how I introduced him when he was not there. What I heard was another request for praise before the cabinet was finished. I said I introduced him as my husband when he acted like one and as free maintenance when he arrived carrying tools. Elspeth laughed from the sofa. My younger sister turned discomfort into entertainment because silence reminded her of our childhood flat. She called Jonah my housemaid in a man's body, then said he was my personal doormat whenever guests came. Jonah closed the tool case. One latch, then the other. He asked whether I needed anything else before he left for the workshop. I gave him Elspeth's online return because the parcel shop was on his route. Jonah had made himself reliable, and the rest of us adjusted. Camilla did not laugh after that. She waited until the front door closed and asked why I talked to him like an employee I wanted to embarrass into quitting. I told her she was confusing directness with disrespect. At Belgrave, people trusted me because I did not wrap a standard in soft paper. Jonah knew that before he married me. Of course, Camilla said marriage was not a hotel. I reminded her she had never kept one. Her engagement ended after her fiancé signed a lease in another city without telling her, so every hidden choice looked like betrayal. She gathered her drawings and asked Jonah's exact workbench size before leaving. 82 inches, she said, checking the note on her phone. I asked why she knew that. She said she had a restoration contract coming up and wanted to know what equipment he used. Architects measure everything. I filed it there. Over the next month, Jonah collected brass fittings and delivered fabric books to Camilla's carriage house. He also loaded 2 old lamps into his van because I had promised them to Elspeth. Each time he asked whether I needed anything else. He still came home. That mattered more than canvas bags or a missing tool case. A man planning to leave does not remember oat milk. Jonah remembered mine every Sunday. The first real argument came after Elspeth missed her train to our mother's birthday lunch. I told Jonah to drive across town and collect her. He said he could not because Price & Son was holding its yearly open afternoon in memory of his father. Customers brought in pieces his father had restored, and Jonah served tea from the same dented kettle we used when we met. I knew about the afternoon. I also knew Elspeth was stranded 30 minutes away while old chairs could wait another year. I told him family came before nostalgia. He said Elspeth could take a taxi and reminded me that he had asked us both to attend. I called that unfair. My mother was already waiting. Elspeth was upset, and he was turning one ride into a test of loyalty. He went quiet, which always forced me to make the decision both of us knew was practical. He collected her. That evening, he said he had told me no once, and I had treated the answer as a defect. His father's open day ended before he returned. 4 customers left their pieces with the neighboring shop. I told him he could have refused. Adults own their choices. He said he had refused. I had simply kept pushing until refusal cost more than surrender. That sentence made ordinary family pressure sound cruel. I told him perhaps being needed let him avoid deciding what he wanted. That part was true. Jonah could restore a cabinet from rotten panels, but ask where he wanted Christmas and he became fog. He wanted everyone comfortable, then resented whoever chose. He did not deny it. His eyes moved to the brass bell on the sideboard. For 1 second, he looked tired rather than weak. The difference was small enough to ignore. He asked whether there was anything else. I told him the van needed fuel before morning. 2 days later, Camilla asked him to inspect 6 walnut doors at her carriage house. I went because the hotel owned them. Her studio smelled of plaster dust. Along the back wall was an empty space exactly wide enough for a large workbench, with new sockets above it. Camilla offered Jonah the contract directly, with his own fee and schedule. I laughed and said she was trying to steal my unpaid handyman. She answered that a person could not be stolen from a job he had never agreed to do. Jonah said he would think about the contract. Camilla then mentioned the furnished room above her studio and asked whether he ever needed somewhere quiet to work. Her tone stayed practical. Mine did not. I asked if my beautiful single friend was offering my husband a bed. Jonah stepped back from both of us. He said he loved his wife, had made vows, and was not looking for a way around them. That should have pleased me. Instead, his seriousness made my joke look cheap. Camilla apologized to him and said the room was an exit from noise, not an invitation into her life. She told me love without respect was only unpaid service. On the drive home, I accused Jonah of enjoying her concern. He asked what response would satisfy me. Defense would become interest, anger would become insecurity, and silence would prove both. I told him not to turn my friend's mistake into one of his careful little puzzles. Then I reminded him that Elspeth needed the 2 lamps delivered before Saturday. He carried them to the van that night. Beside them, he placed a flat wooden box from his father's workshop. I assumed it contained mounting brackets. Jonah checked the van doors, came back inside, and asked whether I needed anything else. I gave him Camilla's fabric books. By Saturday, The lamps were in Elspeth's flat, and the books were at the carriage house. The wooden box was nowhere I could see. The West Wing reopening was the kind of night I understood. 120 guests, 2 bars, and a schedule measured in minutes. I had spent 4 months making old plaster look expensive, and I intended to stand in the centre when people praised it. Jonah was meant to attend as my husband. That was the invitation I gave him. He arrived in a charcoal suit with sawdust still caught near one cuff because he had repaired a display table that afternoon. Before he could take a drink, I asked him to check a cabinet door near reception. It dragged against the carpet and guests would notice. He looked toward the ballroom, then asked whether I needed anything else. I added a loose brass plate by the lift and Elspeth's overnight bag from my office. Jonah was already there. Camilla asked why the maintenance team was not doing hotel maintenance. I said Jonah could fix the plate in half the time. Of course, she treated his silence as injury instead of efficiency. The brass bell sat on the reception desk because its worn surface looked right against the new green marble. It was meant as a design detail with history. Then the coat clerk left to help a guest who had fallen near the entrance. A woman handed Jonah her fur coat while he stood beside the desk. Another guest passed him a case. He carried both into the cloakroom and came back. People saw a man doing a job and trusted him with the next thing. That is how service works. Elspeth arrived in silver heels, watched Jonah accept a third coat, and asked whether Belgrave had put my housemaid on payroll. 2 donors laughed. I did too. Jonah placed the coat ticket on the desk. He asked me, quietly, whether I wanted him beside me for the ribbon cutting. I told him I wanted him wherever he was most useful. Len, the photographer, lowered his camera. Jonah always said actions mattered more than ceremonies, yet he looked at the bell as if it had accused him. I saw Camilla approaching and rang it once. The note cut through the lobby. I told Jonah the lift plate still needed him. Elspeth added that staff should not keep management waiting. 4 people laughed. Camilla did not. Jonah took the screwdriver from his pocket. Before walking away, he asked whether there was anything else. Same calm tone. Same acceptance. I told him to bring my speech folder from the office when he finished. The ribbon cutting began without him. Helen March, Belgrave's general manager, asked where he was. I said he had found somewhere useful to be. She looked toward the lift instead of the camera. Jonah returned during the applause and stood behind the last row, holding my folder and Elspeth's navy garment bag. He watched while I accepted praise for a wing he had helped repair after hours. That was his flaw in its purest form. Jonah refused to claim space, then acted forgotten when nobody saved it for him. During drinks, a server dropped a tray. Jonah moved before the hotel staff, crouched, and turned the broken glass inward with a napkin. Elspeth rested one silver shoe on the brass rail and asked him to wipe champagne from the heel while he was down there. Jonah looked at me. I told him not to be precious. It was only champagne. He wiped the rail, not her shoe. The donors beside her laughed. Len's camera clicked once. Camilla took the cloth from Jonah and asked whether Elspeth's arms had stopped working. Elspeth called him borrowed labor. Camilla answered that no one there owned him. The room around us went still enough for the pianist to sound too loud. I stepped between them and said Camilla was creating a scene over a wet shoe. Then I told Jonah to load the restored reading chair into her van for final photographs. He stood. His knees cracked. He asked whether I needed anything else. I handed him Elspeth's garment bag for our car. He carried the chair through the service corridor with the navy bag across its seat. When he returned, both were gone. I assumed Camilla stored the bag so it would not crease. She became overly careful whenever she decided someone needed rescue. The rest of the reception stayed polite. Helen thanked Jonah before me, and Len avoided us. My plan still worked. Every room was booked before midnight. On the loading dock, Jonah named the coat desk, the bell, and my sentence about where he was useful. He had arrived as my husband, he said, and I reassigned him before he reached the room. I said he had chosen to help and could not punish me for noticing his talent. He admitted that he had trained people to expect yes because saying no made him feel selfish. Then he asked why my respect disappeared whenever another person watched. I said respect did not require a public announcement. He asked whether disrespect did. Camilla stood several feet away, holding her van keys. She told Jonah the restoration contract remained open, and so did the room above her studio. Jonah answered that he loved me and would not leave his marriage because one bad night made another home look easier. His voice shook once. Not strategy. Sadness. He still chose me. I heard the choice and focused on the insult. One bad night. I accused him of enjoying Camilla's defense and damaging a successful evening. He looked at the brass bell through the glass lobby doors. After a while, he asked whether I needed anything else. I told him to bring the car around. The next morning, Len's photograph appeared in the staff group chat. It showed my hand on the bell while Jonah crouched near Elspeth's shoe. Nobody added a caption. By lunch, 2 supervisors had forwarded the image to Helen and asked whether Jonah had been hired for the evening. I answered that he was my husband and had helped by choice. One of them replied with a thumbs up, then removed it. Camilla sent no message at all. I kept the photograph on my phone because deleting it would have looked ashamed, and I had nothing to be ashamed of. The problem was not the image. The problem was everyone pretending they had never accepted Jonah's help before. My plan for the anniversary began that afternoon. I would give Jonah a beautiful night, surround him with people who knew us, and prove that the photograph had caught a harmless second instead of our marriage. My mother saw the photograph before I called her. Maureen rarely discussed work events because hotels tightened her shoulders, but she asked me to visit Sunday and did not say please. Her flat smelled of laundry powder and boiled apples. Jonah sat by the window with a mug between both hands. I had not known he would be there. Elspeth was absent, which annoyed me because she had helped create the picture and left me to explain it. Maureen placed her phone on the table with the photograph open. She asked whether I remembered the girls who clicked their fingers at me outside school. I said that was different. They wanted me to feel beneath them. Jonah knew I depended on him. She asked whether dependence was meant to look like a shoe near his face. I told her nobody touched him. Elspeth was joking. Jonah chose to crouch, and the camera flattened the whole moment. One photograph, one angle, no sound. Of course, people preferred a cruel story because it let them feel clean. Jonah did not help me. He told Maureen the photograph looked accurate. My mother rubbed a worn patch on the tablecloth. She said she had cleaned up after people for money and still deserved her name. Then she asked when I had stopped using Jonah's. That was not fair. I said his name every day. Jonah asked how often I used it before an order. 2 against 1. I stood because sitting there made me feel 12 again, trapped beside my mother's uniform. I had worked too hard to be shamed for expecting help inside my marriage. Maureen said she had not raised me to confuse help with rank. I left before dessert. Jonah came home after dark. The brass bell was wrapped in his father's shop cloth on the hall table. He unwrapped it and ran his thumb along a dent near the base. Then he said something so sentimental that I almost missed the simple sadness under it. His father had trusted customers to ring that bell when they needed his skill. He had never used it to remind anyone of their place. I told Jonah metal did not carry morals. People assigned meaning after they were offended. He said I had taken the last sound from his father's shop and made it mean come here. His eyes stayed on the bell. For once, he did not look controlled. He looked tired and older than 42. The sight opened a narrow space in me. I remembered the blue mug, the crate, and the way he used to ring once when the kettle boiled. For several seconds, I could see how far the sound had travelled. Then he asked why I had laughed at the photograph. The space closed. If he wanted repair, he could not begin by prosecuting me. I said I laughed because Elspeth expected it and guests were watching. I had protected the room. That was my job. For 2 weeks, I stopped touching the bell. I called that compromise. Jonah called it removal of one object while the pattern stayed in place. He named the parcels, the rides, and the way I handed him empty glasses without looking at his face. This was his new tactic. Accumulation. If he stacked enough ordinary moments together, He could make marriage sound like a workhouse. I changed approach and told him I understood that he felt taken for granted. For our 10th anniversary, I booked the glass conservatory at Belgrave and promised he would be the guest of honor. Even the menu began with his choice. He said he wanted dinner at home with me and no audience. I explained that an audience was the point. People had seen the photograph, so people needed to see us happy. Someone had to correct the public version before it settled. He asked whether the night was for him or for my reputation. I told him those things did not have to compete. Camilla stopped answering my calls after 6. Her work messages became exact and dry. When I visited the carriage house to approve door samples, Jonah's old navy garment bag hung from a hook above the stairs. I recognized the repaired leather handle. Camilla said Elspeth had left it in her van after the reopening, and Jonah had not collected it yet. That explanation was untidy, but possible. I walked past it. In the studio, a young carpenter named Leon was fitting a protective top over the empty workbench space. He asked Camilla whether Tuesday was still the final load. She looked at Jonah, who had arrived through the rear door carrying the flat wooden box from his father's shop. For a second, the room arranged itself without my permission. The exact bench measurements. New sockets. His bag upstairs. The box in his hands. Leon waiting for a final load. Jonah set the box down and asked whether I needed anything else from him before he started on the walnut doors. There it was. The same obedient question. The shape broke apart. I decided Camilla was moving hotel furniture into storage and had borrowed Jonah's things to test the layout. Architects made simple work sound secret because secrecy raised their fees. I approved the door stain and left. At home, his side of the wardrobe had more space than before. 2 winter coats were gone, along with the brown shoes he wore only to funerals. I moved my evening dresses across the rail. Empty space attracts use. That is not a warning. It is poor organization being corrected. Elspeth's replies slowed. When I sent her apron ideas for the anniversary, she waited a day before choosing black. I planned a small joke for the first course. Jonah would wear a smart service apron with a gold staff pin, carry in the wine, and let everyone see that he could laugh at himself. Then I would remove it before dinner and toast him properly. Balanced. Warm. Clear. Camilla told me the joke was cruel. I asked why she cared so much about my husband. She said someone had to care in a way that did not produce another task for him. I told her she sounded like a woman waiting beside a damaged marriage with an empty room prepared. She said the room existed because Jonah deserved one place where no bell could reach him. Then she warned me that one day I would give an order he finally obeyed all the way. Of course she wanted to sound wise. Beautiful single women are often treated like experts on married men because they can imagine solutions without living through the bills. Jonah accepted the anniversary invitation after I showed him the guest list. Maureen. Helen. 2 couples from the hotel. Elspeth and Camilla. People who had seen enough to appreciate a correction. He asked whether I wanted anything else before he confirmed. I told him to collect the black apron from the embroiderer on Tuesday. That evening, he removed his spare workshop key from our hallway hook. He rubbed the brass tag clean with his sleeve, then put it in his pocket. I assumed he needed it for Leon. The anniversary would put everything back where it belonged. Rain moved down the glass conservatory roof, and the long table faced the courtyard my mother once crossed with dirty linen. 10 years deserved more than dinner at home. Jonah arrived early to help with place cards. He wore the charcoal suit from the reopening and saw the brass bell beside my plate. Then he saw the apron. The black apron hung over his chair with a gold staff pin. The joke would last 1 course. Then I would toast him and give him the restored blue mug from our workshop nights. Jonah asked me to put both objects in my office. We could greet the guests, eat, and go home together. In the morning, we could say every hard thing without an audience. That was his final offer. I said he did not get to set conditions after making me carry every decision. He answered feelings with repairs, then blamed me for believing the useful version he performed. Jonah admitted I was right. His silence made me guess, and some of his help carried resentment he never admitted. The admission landed cleanly. I could have stopped there. Instead, I said a man who behaved like staff should not fear a pin. I held the apron open. He asked whether I needed anything else. I told him to wear it when Elspeth arrived. His face became still. He put on the apron. Maureen kissed Jonah before me. Helen arrived with her wife and 2 hotel couples. Camilla entered alone and stopped when she saw Jonah filling water glasses in the apron. She asked whether this was my apology. I said she was a guest inside our marriage. She thanked Jonah by name. Of course, the correction was meant for me. Elspeth arrived late with rain on her shoes. She stared at the pin. I reminded her she chose the apron colour, but she said she had not agreed to what I added. That was convenient. Elspeth loved a joke until she saw which way the room leaned. After serving the soup, Jonah tried to sit. I rang the bell and asked for white wine. Maureen put down her spoon. Jonah brought the bottle. Before pouring, he asked whether I needed anything else. I said Elspeth wanted bread. She denied asking. People made small routines sound ugly once they chose someone to rescue. Helen offered to pour her own wine. Jonah looked at me instead of the empty chair, making my permission visible. I told him to sit if he was tired. He removed the apron, and for 10 minutes we ate like an ordinary couple. Maureen asked about the walnut doors. Camilla listened when he answered. She listened with her whole face. My husband became interesting at my anniversary because another woman decided to look impressed. I reached for the bell and tapped it with one finger. No ring, just brass against nail. Then I began my toast. I thanked everyone for witnessing 10 years and said one photograph had turned our private rhythm into cruelty. Jonah loved helping. I loved leading. Some husbands gave speeches. Mine made sure everyone else enjoyed the room. Helen looked down. June stopped smiling. Stopping would have turned their discomfort into a verdict. I said Jonah might be a better servant than husband, but he was the most loyal servant a woman could have. I held out the apron. Elspeth gave one weak laugh. Jonah did not take it. Camilla asked me to stop. I reminded the table that she had offered my husband a room and a job, so she was hardly neutral. Camilla said she offered him a door because I kept showing him the floor. She also said he had refused the room twice because he still loved me. Twice. The studio and the reopening. 2 chances to embarrass me, and he had stayed. It made me feel managed. They discussed my marriage while I arranged a night to repair it, casting her as kind and me as the woman outside the glass. I told Jonah he had used loyalty as a performance. If he wanted to stay, he should stop letting Camilla speak for him and finish the role he had chosen. I held out the apron again. He said that if I put away the bell, called him my husband, and left with him, he would still come home. He promised one honest conversation, not that the marriage survived. No one moved. Accepting would have let him set terms in my room. I had escaped service corridors and would not be ordered through one by a man who hid inside chores. I rang the bell. One clean note. Then I told Jonah to put on the apron, bring dessert, and stop turning our anniversary into therapy for Camilla's benefit. He tied it around his waist. Elspeth reached for her champagne. Her hand caught the stem and tipped the glass. Liquid ran over the table edge and down onto her shoe. Jonah bent with a napkin before anyone asked. Elspeth lifted her heel, perhaps from habit, perhaps because she was nervous. The wet sole pressed against the bottom of the black apron. She dragged it once across the cloth. I laughed. It came out louder than hers. Maureen pushed her chair back. Camilla stood. Helen said my name, only once, in the tone she used when a guest had crossed a line that could not be softened with an upgrade. I told them to stop acting as if Elspeth had stepped on his body. It was an apron. Cloth exists to take dirt. Difficult rooms always pulled Jonah downward, and he was already crouching. He rose slowly and asked whether I needed anything else. The question sounded flatter than before, but I heard surrender. I told him to bring the anniversary cake, leave before the group photographs, and take the apron with him so Camilla could frame it in her rescue room. Camilla said she would take him anywhere he chose to go. I looked at her beautiful face, then at my helpful husband, and finally said what everyone had been forcing me toward all night. If she wanted him so badly, she could have him. She could take the workshop dust, the silence, and the man who needed another woman to teach him he had a spine. I reached for Elspeth, expecting the laugh that had carried us through every ugly room since childhood. Her chair was empty. Her coat had gone from the stand. Fine. She had always been weak after the joke became real. Jonah stood beside the dessert cart with his hands calm at his sides. He did not untie the stained apron. He did not defend Camilla or ask me to reconsider. He only watched me lift the brass bell. I rang it one last time, certain every person at that table had seen me win. Jonah stood straight when the sound ended. Then he smiled. It was small, almost tired, but it changed the question he had asked me for months. His final question asked whether I still needed anything else from him. I kept my fingers on the bell and told him there was not. He could take everything that belonged to him and leave with Camilla. I expected him to look toward our home in his mind, to count furniture, clothes, and the 10 years I still controlled. He said there was nothing left there to take. Camilla placed a brass key on the table. I knew the tag. Jonah had polished it in our hallway before putting it in his pocket. The olive canvas carryall had carried his father's ledgers and family photographs to the room above her studio. The flat wooden box beside Elspeth's lamps held his carving tools, not mounting brackets. The navy garment bag I kept calling my sister's had belonged to Jonah's father. His winter coats and brown shoes were inside it when the reading chair went through the service corridor. Leon's final load had been the 82-inch workbench. Even the empty wardrobe rail had been there for me to see. Every errand had taken one piece of Jonah out of our house. Every time he asked whether I needed anything else, he had given me a chance to look at him before I added another stop. I picked up the key. Camilla took it from my fingers without pulling. She said she had stored boxes and offered paid work. She had not asked Jonah for a relationship, and she was not taking property from me now. The choice belonged to him. I tried to tell the table that they were watching an affair dressed as charity. Helen did not accept it. She said everyone present had heard Jonah refuse Camilla twice, and everyone had just heard me order him away. Of course she chose the version with no room for context. Elspeth was not there to turn that sentence into laughter. Jonah removed the apron and folded the stained edge inward. Then he took off his wedding ring. His hand shook when he placed it beside the bell. He admitted that he had hidden inside useful work and let silence rot into contempt. He also said he had spent 10 years choosing me while I treated each choice as proof that he could be made to stay. He was choosing a life where nobody summoned him. Camilla waited. Jonah nodded once. She touched his face and kissed him, brief and careful, after the ring was already on the table. The kiss was not stolen. That made it worse. He took her hand, and the guests opened a path toward the conservatory doors. Maureen left with them. Helen and June followed. The two hotel couples did not look at me as they collected their coats. Rain blew through the open doorway and moved the place card beside Jonah's empty seat. A petition for dissolution arrived 4 days later, with a property inventory due before mediation. I moved into a staff rate room at Belgrave while the house was prepared for sale. Without Jonah's unpaid work, I spent £900 in the first month on repairs and deliveries. Maureen stopped taking my calls, and Elspeth answered only once to say the shoe had been her choice, but the laughter had been mine. Camilla and Jonah finished the walnut doors together, and 6 months later, their names appeared on the invitation to the studio reopening. Helen removed me from guest operations and assigned me to supplier records while the company reviewed my use of the conservatory and staff allowance. I had believed giving orders proved I had escaped the service entrance where my mother once waited. Jonah's obedience let me stand in the front and pretend rank followed me home. When he stopped answering, the front door did not become mine. It became a door I had to open without someone reaching it first. The brass bell still works. I know because now, whenever it rings, I am the one who has to answer it.